Hello and welcome back to the Air Armoury. I'm JRH and today I'm looking at the Anschütz Hakim military training air rifle. Numerous countries have experimented with air guns for military training purposes over the years, predominantly in Europe prior to the Second World War, but this is one of the limited number of post-World War II ones. And the benefits of using air guns for military training are that they are considerably cheaper, as pellets cost a lot less than bullets, and they can be used for general marksmanship and safety training without having to use a full power rifle with a lot of recoil. So there are characteristics which are shared by most, if not all, military air guns, in that they are generally the same size, weight and length of the service rifles they're trying to replicate. Most of them are quite generic or loosely based on specific guns, but this one is a bit of an exception to that. So let's talk a bit about this particular model and how it came about. So in the early 1950s, the Egyptian military was looking to replace their standard issue bolt-action service rifles with a new self-loading or semi-automatic rifle, and they adopted the Hakim. So the Hakim was essentially a copy of the Swedish AG-42 Lungmen rifle, which Egypt had licensed the design and tooling for. And for training purposes, they bought a number of 2.2 rimfire versions from Beretta in Italy, but the Egyptian government also contracted with Anschütz to make these air rifle training versions. Anschütz, or J.G. Anschütz to give them their proper name, are a German manufacturer of a wide range of air guns and firearms, and in terms of air guns they're best known for their high-end target rifles. The company was originally founded in 1856 by Julius Gottfried Anschütz, who was the son of a master rifle maker named Johann Heinrich Gottlieb Anschütz. The company was originally based in what is now the town of Zella-Mehlis in central Germany, but they moved to the city of Ulm in southern Germany when Zella-Mehlis was occupied by the Soviets following the Second World War. Now, Anschütz made a relatively faithful airgun version of the Hakim, which they based on their model of 1954 air rifle. And no one, including Anschütz incidentally, is sure of the exact number of these that were manufactured, but the consensus is that it was between 2,500 and 2,800. Now, the Hakim turned out to not be a fantastic rifle, so was phased out in the mid-60s, at which point the air rifle trainers were put into storage until they were surplused and sold off in the 1980s or 90s. So we'll pick that story up there later on in the video, but for now let's take a closer look at the Anschütz Hakim military training air rifle. This is a spring piston underlever air rifle, and the underlever is fully concealed within the stock, and the shape of the lever nicely follows the lines of the stock, which you can see there. And then there is a sturdy spring-loaded catch on the front of the lever to hold it in place. Now you load the gun by way of a loading tap on the top, which opens automatically when you cock the gun, and I'll show you how that works in a minute when I take the stock off. So to load it, you open the tap, drop the pellet in nose first, and then close the tap to rotate the pellet in line with the barrel. Now this is really quite a large gun. It weighs 10.3 pounds or 4.65 kilograms, which is very heavy for an air gun, especially for one without a scope on it. And that's because it had weight added to it to give it the feel of the real Hakim rifle, and I can show you how they did that later. So whilst it is heavy, it's quite nicely balanced and it absorbs any recoil there might be, so it feels smooth to shoot. Now it's 44 3/4 inches or 114 centimetres long, with a 19.5 inch or 49.5 centimetre long rifle barrel. And in terms of calibre, they were made in 2.2 only, which is pleasing to me as it's easy to get ammunition for, as lots of military training air rifles are in slightly more unusual calibres. I should point out briefly though that Walter Smith, in his book Small Arms of the World, of which I have a copy of the relevant page here, mentions a 4.5mm or 177 version, but that is widely believed to be a mistake. There are no known examples of the rifle in 177, and as far as I'm aware, there aren't even any other references to a 177 version anywhere. So on this page you can see the Anschütz air rifle version at the bottom here, the Beretta rimfire version here, and then the real Hakim rifle above that. It has an almost full-length military style hardwood stock. The majority of it is just one piece, but it does have a separate piece for the upper handguard here. It has some grooves cut in the side to add grip, and the whole thing is finished in quite a dark finish. Now the rifle is clearly in used condition, and that's visible nowhere more so than on the stock, although the majority of which I would call character rather than damage, but it's not without a few dents, chips and a very slight crack. That being said, this one isn't significantly worse than a lot of the others out there, and given that they were used for military training, it's to be expected. They were all heavily used. In fact, I know that when they were sold off by Egypt, the rifles were all graded, with some guns in the lowest grade actually having broken stocks. In terms of hardware, starting at the back, there is a plain metal butt plate, a rear sling swivel under the stock, a sturdy metal trigger guard, and then a front barrel band which encompasses the front sling swivel. Now, as you can see, this rifle does have a sling fitted. This was on it when I got the gun. It's definitely quite old and it's stitched in place, and I've seen others with this style and colour of sling, so I think that's probably original, but obviously I can't be 100% sure. We then have this chunk of metal on the top of the gun. Now, I've seen this referred to as a sighting aid amongst other things, but it in fact has no functional use. It is there purely to faithfully replicate the sliding bolt cover and stripper clip guide on the original Hakim rifle, even down to the wire loops on the side, albeit the Hakim only had a wire loop on one side which acted as a brass deflector, and as on the Hakim, it is of course cut out to allow you to see the sights through it. So as you can hopefully see, it is a very well made gun. There's no plastic on it, it's all steel and wood, and the majority of the metal parts are milled rather than cheaper stampings with what looks like a parkerized finish. Now, I guess they had to be well constructed to endure the rigours of military training, so I imagine the expected quality was probably stipulated in the contract for the guns. I'm now going to remove the stock so you can see what's going on underneath. Now, due to the nature of the military style stock, it's a slightly longer process than with your average sporter stock. So starting at the front of the gun, I need to remove the front cap, and to do that I press in on this flat spring underneath, which allows me to slide that off, and that stays captive on the barrel due to the front sight. I then need to undo the screw through the sling swivel and barrel band. I can then slide that barrel band forwards, and that allows me to remove the upper handguard. I then need to take out this screw going through the centre of the stock. And then lastly, I need to take out both the screws in the trigger guard. The action is then free to lift out of the stock, but to do so it's easier to first unclip the underlever. With the stock off, you can see this tab here attached to the cocking link, and when the gun is cocked, that moves back and hits this surface here, which is attached to the loading tap, and that is what makes the tap automatically open when the gun is cocked. And you can see that is nicely held in place by a spring-loaded ball bearing. Now next to that is a marking A491. Now I'm not actually sure what that is in relation to, and that is the only English, or not so much English, but the only non-Arabic marking on the gun, as you'll see later. Then this ring or collar fixed to the barrel is the locking surface for the underlever clip. It has a 2-stage adjustable trigger. It's quite a nice trigger, there's not a lot of creep, and it breaks crisply, and this rifle does not have a safety. Now, as I said earlier, in order to replicate a real rifle, this is a heavy gun, and it's heavier than the air gun should be, so with the stock off it's a good chance to see some of the ways that they added weight to the gun. Now, it is a thick barrel its entire length, but it does actually start even thicker, and then there are 2 steps down. They haven't actually just milled the whole barrel down. Then looking at the stock, you can see that there is what looks like a piece of lead set into the fore end to add weight there. And then if I remove one of the screws from the butt plate and swing that round, you can see that they have also set a metal rod into the rear of the stock. In terms of sights, the front sight is a hooded blade mounted on quite a high metal block. It has a tangent style rear sight with just a standard notch out the back. It's windage adjustable using this screw at the side, and it is also elevation adjustable, but unfortunately this particular example is missing the slider for the elevation adjustment. The sight has graduation markings which are all in Arabic. Now these are either for 0, 10, 20 and 30 metres, or 5, 15, 25 and 35 metres. I'm not 100% sure of the translation, but it's definitely one of those 2 sets of distances. Overall, these sights are a little small, but they're perfectly usable, and the sight picture is okay. Now there is some debate as to whether you can mount a scope on this gun. Now to me it seems like you can, but that was never the intention. So it does have a dovetail rail at the back on the trigger block, but at 2.5 inches or 6.35 centimetres it is very short, and it doesn't extend onto the main cylinder. And that's because this rail isn't actually for a scope, it's for fitting an aperture sight. Now this rifle didn't actually have an aperture sight, but it's the same trigger block as on the Anschütz model of 1954, which did have an aperture sight. One of the most interesting things about this rifle is the markings, which, as you saw from the rear sight, are all in Arabic. So whilst the gun was made in Germany, they obviously don't speak German in Egypt, and as this rifle was made under military contract rather than for commercial sale, they could specify how the guns were marked. So starting at the back on the trigger block, on the left hand side it translates as air gun for exercise or air gun for training, something along those lines. Then on the top it says caliber 5.5mm 1954, so 1954 referring to the Anschütz model of 1954, which, as I said earlier, is the rifle this gun was based on. Then on the right hand side we have Anschütz Germany 1955, so that's obviously the manufacturer, the country of manufacture and the year of manufacturer. And then on the back we have this crest which features a moon and 3 stars, which was found on the Egyptian flag of the time. Then moving up the gun, next to the loading tap, we have the serial number. This one is 00836. Then on top of the gun, on the kind of receiver area, there is a skull and crossbones with what look like flames either side, but they in fact aren't flames, they're actually further Arabic text. To the left of the skull it says national, but I've seen conflicting translations of this bit to the right of it. One translation said that it is Union, to denote these rifles were used by the National Union Youth Movement, but I've also seen that translated as Guard, with National Guard being a generic patriotic slogan rather than an actual organisation. The other markings you might come across on these rifles, which aren't found on mine, are some hand-painted Arabic text in white on the buttstock. Now, I'm not totally sure what they're for, but I assume they're something like unit markings or inventory markings. So I'm now going to test the accuracy of the rifle, and I'm going to fire 10 of these BSA Pilarm No. 2 pellets at one of these 14 centimetre square targets from a distance of around 12 metres. Here I have my target. Now it's a pretty good grouping, or line, with just a couple of strays over there. Now I'm more than happy with that for open sights, and I think if I could adjust the elevation so that I could hold dead centre rather than having to hold over, I'm pretty sure I could get a better consistency in terms of the height of the group. So I'm now going to test the power by firing another 10 of those BSA Pilarm No. 2 pellets over the chronograph. Here I have my chronograph test sheet, and I've already done all of my calculations. With those 14.3 grain BSA Pilarm No. 2 pellets, I got an average velocity of 453.31 feet per second, with a spread of 91.4 feet per second, the highest being 507.7 feet per second, and the lowest being 416.3 feet per second. Then using that average of 453.31 feet per second, that gives me a power of 6.53 foot-pounds. Now I'm happy enough with that power. I'm more concerned about the spread of nearly 100 feet per second, but I guess that's not too much of an issue for an old gun like this. Now I'm not sure what power these were supposed to achieve when they were new, and I've never taken this one apart, so I don't know what condition the internals are in, but from what I've read, the power of this one seems to be about average for one in used condition these days. But I have read stories of them being tuned up to over 10 foot-pounds and being used for hunting. There you've seen the Anschütz Hakim military training air rifle. Now this really is an excellent rifle. It's made to a very high standard, it's nice to shoot, and it's pretty accurate. Then on top of the merits of the rifle itself, you have the military history interest and the backstory to it, which I find fascinating. And despite it not being a true firearm, even Ian McCollum from ForgottenWeapons.com described these as a neat piece of history. So going back to the story where we left off earlier on, as I said, there are only between 2,500 and 2,800 of these ever made, and not all of those survived to the point of being sold off. And even some of those that were sold off weren't in working condition, so were broken down for parts to fix others that could be saved. So when these were sold off, they were only sold to importers and distributors, not to individuals. And whilst I have read some anecdotal evidence that a number of these made it to Lebanon in the 1970s for training child soldiers in the Civil War there, the vast majority were sold off to the West. Most of the surviving guns ended up in the United States, with as little as 300 making it to the UK. And after the initial influx into the market, most have now settled down into collections, so they are a relatively scarce gun and are only getting rarer as time goes on. Now obviously their rarity has a knock-on impact on their value. The current price in the UK is around the £600 mark. I won't tell you how much I paid for this one, other than that I got a good deal on it. They generally tend to be a bit cheaper in the US as they're more available, but prices are rising there as well. So thanks for watching, hope you found the video interesting. If so, be sure to like, comment and subscribe to the Air Armoury, and until next time, keep your arms in the air.